You think betrayal hurts? Try overhearing the man you love brag about sleeping with your closest friend. That's how my story begins, and trust me, you'll want to hear the rest. Please stay with me, and remember to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this story, because the way karma hits here is almost cinematic. When I first met Ryan, I wasn't looking for love. I was busy with early shifts at the coffee shop, juggling pastry school, and daydreaming about the dessert shop I wanted to open someday. He walked in one morning, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who looked like he could fix anything with his hand. At first, it was just small talk while I made his coffee, but he kept coming back. Every day, same time, same order, same warm smile. It was Marissa, my best friend since college, who pushed me to give him a chance. She said I worked too much, that I needed someone who'd get me out of my routine. Marissa had always been the bubbly one, the type to light up any room. She knew everyone, and people loved her instantly. Her boyfriend, Caleb, was different, calm, observant, the type who noticed things others missed. He never said much about Ryan, but I could feel he wasn't a fan. I told myself Caleb was just being protective. Ryan seemed genuine. He'd surprise me with flowers, take me on long drives, and remember the tiniest things I mentioned. Once, after I said I missed my grandmother's Sunday pancakes, he found a little diner that made them almost the same way. Sitting across from him, laughing over coffee, I thought maybe this was the start of something real. Still, there were small moments I couldn't quite place. Times when Ryan would look away mid-conversation, or when his phone would buzz and he'd flip it face down like it was nothing. I pushed those thoughts aside. Everyone had secrets, right? Maybe I just wasn't used to letting someone in. Back then, I didn't realize how quickly trust could crack. I thought the people closest to me, my best friend, the man I was falling for, were the safest parts of my life. But soon, I'd find myself standing outside a door, hearing laughter that didn't belong to me, and words that would change everything I believed about them. And when that moment came, I didn't knock. I didn't confront. I just stood there, frozen, knowing deep down that life as I knew it had just taken a sharp turn I'd never be able to undo. It didn't happen all at once, just little things that didn't seem important at first. Ryan began saying he had to stay late at job sites, always with some vague excuse about deadlines or equipment issues. I tried not to mind, but I noticed he kept his phone close, never leaving it unattended. If a message came in, he'd glance at it quickly, lock the screen, and change the subject. Marissa, who used to show up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and a dozen stories, started canceling plans. At first, it was work, too many meetings, deadlines, client calls that went late. Then it became stranger reasons, flimsy ones that didn't match the easy openness we used to have. Even when we did meet, she seemed somewhere else. Her eyes would drift, her phone lighting up with messages she never explained. Caleb stayed quiet most of the time, but I could feel him watching. There was a weight in his glances whenever Ryan's name came up. Once, when I mentioned Ryan's long hours, Caleb said something short, almost nothing at all, but the tone made me uncomfortable. I told myself he was just being protective of Marissa and me, the way he always had been. Still, his silences lingered. I kept pushing the uneasy feelings away. We were adults with busy lives. People get tired, schedules shift, and friends can't always drop everything. But there was something else in the air now, something I couldn't name. Conversations seemed shorter. Jokes didn't land the same. Even when the four of us were together, there was an undercurrent, a sense that we were each carrying pieces of a story no one wanted to tell. Ryan would brush my hair back and smile, but sometimes it felt like his mind was somewhere I couldn't reach. Marissa would hug me tight, yet her grip didn't have the same warmth it used to. Caleb would sit quietly in the corner of a room, watching but not saying a word. It was as if a thin glass wall had been placed between us all, clear enough to see through, but impossible to break without shattering something. I told myself it was nothing, just a passing phase, a normal drift that happens between friends and couples. But in the quiet moments, when I was wiping down the coffee shop counter at closing or folding laundry in my apartment, the thought would creep in, something's wrong here. And though I didn't know it yet, those small cracks were only the beginning. The weight behind them was gathering, slowly, quietly, ready to split everything wide open. That morning had started out ordinary, too ordinary for me to suspect it would turn into the kind of memory that would burn itself into my mind. I'd worked the early shift, the one where the streets are still quiet and the coffee shop smells like fresh croissants. I was tired, but in a contented way, and as I stacked chairs and wiped counters, I decided to do something small, something sweet. Ryan had a weakness for macarons, especially the pistachio ones from a little bakery across town. I'd been saving a box in the back fridge, planning to surprise him one day when he needed a pick-me-up. On a whim, I packed them neatly, tied the ribbon into a bow, and thought how his face would light up when he saw them. The drive to his usual work site was quick. I recognized his truck instantly, parked a little crooked in the corner of the lot. There were other vehicles scattered around, and I could hear faint voices over the hum of nearby construction equipment. I got out, balancing the pastel-colored box in my hands, and walked toward the small building by the edge of the site. Before I reached the door, a burst of laughter spilled out. It was loud, careless, the kind of laugh people have when they feel completely safe. I froze, just for a second, smiling to myself, thinking maybe Ryan was in the middle of telling a funny story. I stepped closer, ready to knock, but the words that followed made my breath catch. "I've been with Marissa for months," Ryan's voice said, clear as if he were standing right in front of me. Another round of laughter followed, along with a low whistle from someone else. My hands went cold. I told myself I must have heard wrong, that maybe there was another Marissa, some coworker or friend I didn't know. But then his voice came again, lighter this time, like he was proud of himself. "Elena's perfect for looking respectable," he said, "but Marissa's more fun. You know what I mean." The air around me seemed to thin. My fingers loosened without me realizing, and the box slipped. It hit the ground softly, the ribbon unraveling, delicate shells breaking against the concrete. I stared down at them for a moment, perfect little pastries that I had chosen so carefully, now crushed. I didn't move. My back was pressed against the wall beside the door, every sound on the other side cutting into me. Chairs scraped. Someone asked if he was worried I'd find out. Ryan laughed again, low and confident, and said, "She'd never suspect. She trusts me completely." I felt my stomach twist, like something inside me had dropped away. All the late nights. The phone he never left unattended. Marissa's sudden distance. Caleb's unreadable glances. The threads began to connect, each one pulling tight until I could barely breathe. I didn't knock. I didn't push the door open. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I stepped back, slow and quiet, until the sound of their voices dulled. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I reached my car, I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. It was as if my body had decided to shut down until I was somewhere safe, somewhere private. I drove away without looking back, leaving the broken box of macarons on the ground where it had fallen. I don't know if anyone found it later, or if the wind scattered the crumbs. All I know is that in that moment, something between the four of us had ended, and there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't shake. My phone lit up again and again, calls, texts, notifications, but I didn't open a single one. I knew exactly who they were from, and I knew that nothing in those messages could undo what I'd heard. The first thing I did was go through my contacts and erase every trace of them. Ryan gone, Marissa gone, and then the ones that could connect me back to them. Mutual friends, casual acquaintances, even people we'd met once at a barbecue. I blocked them all, one by one, until my phone felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Work became my only safe place. Still, I wasn't taking chances. I swapped shifts with coworkers, volunteering for the odd hours no one wanted. Early mornings, late closings, anything that kept me off the streets when they might be around. I even rearranged my break times, making sure I wouldn't be standing in the front window at predictable moments. I pulled a few of my closest coworkers aside, people I trusted implicitly, and told them in plain terms, "If anyone asks where I am, you don't know." They didn't press me for details, just nodded, eyes full of quiet understanding. It was a strange kind of relief, knowing they had my back without needing the whole story. Meanwhile, the messages kept coming. Marissa's name would flash on my screen over and over, each time with some variation of "please, let me explain," or "it's not what you think." Sometimes she sent long paragraphs. Sometimes it was just my name, like that alone might pull me back. I didn't open any of them. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of thinking I was still listening. Instead, I poured everything into something that didn't involve them at all, my bakery dream. I'd been talking about it for years, sketching menus in the margins of notebooks, saving recipes from old family cookbooks. Now it became more than a dream. It was my lifeline. I started researching every available location within a 30-mile radius. I looked at rent prices, foot traffic, nearby competitors. I drove to neighborhoods I'd never spent time in before, sitting in my car to watch how busy the sidewalks got in the afternoon. I called landlords, asked about square footage and utilities, made notes in a folder that was starting to thicken with possibilities. There was something healing in that process. Every spreadsheet, every scribbled map, every picture of a potential storefront was a step further away from me, a step toward something that was mine, untouched by lies. At night, I'd close my laptop and sit in the quiet, the glow of my desk lamp pooling around me. My phone would still buzz on the edge of the desk, but I never reached for it. The sound meant nothing now, just a reminder of a chapter one was in the process of closing. The truth was, disappearing wasn't as dramatic as I'd imagined it would be. It wasn't running off to another city or changing my name. It was smaller than that. It was choosing where I put my time, my thoughts, my presence, and deliberately keeping them out of reach from the people who had proven they didn't deserve them. And in that space I carved out for myself, I could feel something shifting. It wasn't happiness yet. It wasn't peace. But it was the start of a life where their shadows didn't follow me. And that, for now, was enough. I was closing up the coffee shop when the door swung open and Sophie nearly tripped inside. She was breathless, hair windblown, eyes wide with the kind of urgency that makes you forget to even say hello. She slid into a chair and leaned forward like she was about to tell me state secrets. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice low even though we were alone. The words that followed felt like they didn't quite fit into the air around us. Marissa was telling people she was pregnant. Not just that, she was saying Ryan was the father. Sophie had heard it herself from a mutual acquaintance who clearly enjoyed spreading the news. I sat down across from her, trying to process it. My first thought was that maybe this was just another one of Marissa's dramatics, something exaggerated or twisted. But Sophie's expression told me she wasn't here with half-truth. Then she added the part that made my stomach turn. Marissa had supposedly admitted, in that smug way she had when she thought she was being clever, that she had stopped taking birth control months ago because she knew what she wanted and didn't intend to let him get away. I couldn't even summon anger in that moment, just a strange, cold detachment, like I was watching the mess from somewhere far away. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit together in ways I didn't want them to. The next part of the story didn't reach me until later, when whispers started making their way around. It happened at a friend of a friend's birthday party. Caleb had shown up alone, which was unusual enough to raise eyebrows. Apparently, Marissa was there too, moving through the crowd with that overly sweet laugh she used when she wanted to be noticed. No one knew exactly how the conversation started, but someone overheard her boasting about her plans and how it was only a matter of time before Ryan would be fully hers. The smugness in her voice must have been the final spark because Caleb, quiet, steady Caleb, lost whatever patience he had left. Accounts vary on whether he confronted her right then or walked away without a word. What's certain is that within an hour, he had found out Ryan's usual haunt, a dim, sticky-floored bar where he liked to hold court with a rotating cast of drinking buddies. Caleb walked in, crossed the room without hesitation, and landed the first punch before anyone realized what was happening. No one there stopped him immediately. Some say they'd never seen him so furious, that the force behind each hit carried more than just betrayal. It was years of restraint snapping all at once. Eventually, people pulled him away, but the damage was done. Ryan staggered out the door, blood on his face, shouting threats that didn't sound convincing to anyone. By the next morning, Ryan was gone. His truck disappeared from its usual parking spot. No one could reach him, not even the people he'd been drinking with just hours earlier. It was as if he'd vanished into the dark the moment he walked out of that bar, leaving behind nothing but the echo of Caleb's fists and the sour taste of his own downfall. The irony wasn't lost on me. For all the care Ryan and Marissa had taken to hide what they were doing, it was their own arrogance that pulled it into the open. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest flicker of satisfaction. Not joy, not yet, but the kind of grim recognition that maybe, just maybe, the universe had decided to start evening the score a little earlier than expected. Caleb didn't storm back in. He walked in like a man who knew exactly what he wanted to say. The room quieted in fragments, conversations tapering off as eyes turned toward him. His presence alone seemed to pull the energy out of the air. Marissa, mid-conversation, froze when she saw him. Her laugh died mid-breath, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Caleb didn't give her time to regain her footing. He stepped forward and, without raising his voice, told the entire room that they weren't just dating. They had been married for over a year. The words landed like a dropped glass, the shock rippling from one guest to another. Faces turned toward Marissa, expecting a denial or at least some explanation. She didn't offer one, and Caleb filled the silence instead. He began to piece together a timeline. Every sudden trip, every work emergency, every night she claimed she was staying with a friend. Each example was precise, almost surgical, exposing the ways she had built cover stories for something she never intended anyone to see. The more he spoke, the more the crowd shifted. People who had been leaning in to hear her earlier now stood back. Old friends crossed their arms. A couple whispered to each other before turning their backs entirely. Whatever charm Marissa had relied on was dissolving in real time, replaced by a quiet, unmistakable judgment. Marissa's voice finally broke through, trembling as she insisted it wasn't like that. But every time she tried to speak, her words fell flat. Caleb didn't interrupt her. He didn't need to. The damage was already done, and the room was no longer on her side. Someone asked if Ryan knew what she had been saying. Caleb gave a small, humorless smile and replied that Ryan wouldn't be showing up to answer for anything. No one questioned it further. The weight in his voice was enough to make it clear that Ryan was gone for good. Marissa's defiance melted into pleading, but no one stepped forward to comfort her. Friends who might once have defended her avoided her gaze. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to quiet dismissal, as though she'd become an unwelcome guest in her own circle. By the time the music started up again, she was sitting alone, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor. Caleb had already left, his absence leaving a sharper impression than his presence had. Ryan, true to Caleb's words, disappeared without a trace. No calls, no explanations, just an empty space where he used to be. The night moved on without them, but the echoes of what had been said lingered, turning every whispered conversation into a reminder that whatever image Marissa had crafted for herself had shattered in a single evening. It started with a single message from an unfamiliar number, just a short line asking if I wanted to know the truth about Ryan. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. Within minutes, the photos began arriving. Screenshots, dozens at first, then hundreds, each one time-stamped and pulled from conversations I wasn't meant to see. They came from people who had worked alongside Ryan for years, people who apparently had their own reasons for no longer protecting him. One explained that they had kept quiet before because they didn't want to be involved, but seeing how things had unfolded, they decided I deserved to know. Scrolling through the messages felt like peeling away layers of a wound I thought had already healed. The timestamps went back much further than I had imagined, months before the first moments I'd suspected anything. There they were, Ryan and Marissa, weaving their plans in casual, almost careless words. It wasn't the secrecy that struck me most, it was the tone. The way they laughed about it, the way my name came up, not with hesitation, but with a kind of mocking ease. In one thread, they joked about how I played the perfect role, and how it made them look better in front of certain clients. Ryan even admitted outright that keeping me around had helped him land higher-paying contracts, as though my trust and presence were just another business tool he could manipulate. The further I read, the more I saw the planning behind every arranging meetings under false pretense, using Caleb's absence as an opportunity. Even small details, where they met, how they coordinated, were spelled out with a precision that left no doubt. Then came the part that turned my stomach. Screenshots of Marissa admitting to a friend that she'd stopped taking birth control without telling Ryan, framing it not as an accident, but as a deliberate move to secure him. She spoke about it like it was a strategy, another calculated step in whatever twisted future she was trying to build. The sheer volume of proof was overwhelming. I set my phone down more than once, stepping away just to catch my breath. But each time I came back, the messages were still there, cold, undeniable evidence of just how deep the betrayal had gone. By the time the last screenshot came through, I wasn't even angry anymore. It was something quieter, heavier. Not the shock of discovery, but the certainty that there had never been a version of this, where I could have changed the outcome. They had made their choices long before I knew there was a game being played. I saved every single file, not because I planned to use them right away, but because they felt like a record. Proof that the story I'd lived wasn't just in my head, that the cracks I'd felt were real, and that the people who caused them had done so without hesitation or remorse. The first time I heard Ryan's name in weeks, it wasn't from anyone I knew. It was on the local news. I was in the coffee shop, wiping down tables, when the anchor's voice cut through the low hum of conversation. At first, I thought I'd misheard, but then the screen flashed his picture, and there was no mistaking it. The report was short but direct. Ryan was accused of stealing thousands of dollars worth of building supplies from his employer. Lumber, tools, even specialized equipment, gone over the course of several months. The company had filed charges, and a warrant was out for his arrest. The words "wanted by police" lingered on the screen longer than necessary, as if they knew the image would stick with viewers. I stood frozen, rag in hand, as the details played out. It wasn't just about the theft, it was the way he'd done it. Quietly, methodically, slipping pieces out bit by bit so no one noticed until the numbers stopped adding up. It sounded less like a moment of desperation and more like a habit, something he'd been comfortable doing for a long time. By the end of the segment, the news had moved on, but the ripple effect didn't. Customers at the counter whispered about it. Someone at a nearby table muttered they'd always thought he looked the type. I kept my head down, focusing on stacking chairs, pretending I wasn't listening. Over the next few days, the story deepened. His former co-workers spoke to reporters, some shocked, others less so. One claimed Ryan had been living beyond his means for years. Expensive nights out, luxury items, trips that didn't match his income. Another said he had a way of convincing people to look the other way, making them feel like they were in on something harmless. Then came the rumors. People said he'd left the state, that he was going by a different name, maybe even working construction under the table somewhere far enough that no one would connect the dots. Nothing confirmed, just fragments of sightings and secondhand stories. But given how quickly he'd disappeared before, it wasn't hard to believe. Meanwhile, Marissa's world was shrinking. Without Ryan, the attention she'd thrived on began to fade. Friends who once tolerated her sharp edges stopped returning her calls. Some didn't want to be caught in the middle of her mess. Others just seemed tired of the drama that followed her everywhere. The pregnancy, which she'd once flaunted as proof of her control over the situation, had become another complication she couldn't spin in her favor. I heard through Sophie that Marissa had tried reaching out to people we both knew, but the responses were polite at best, distant at worst. Without Ryan to anchor her in the social circles they'd built together, she was left to navigate alone. And for someone who had always relied on others to boost her image, isolation was a punishment all its own. I didn't take satisfaction in it the way I thought I might. It was strange, seeing both of them unravel without any effort on my part. Whatever game they'd been playing, it had collapsed under its own weight. Ryan, hiding behind a new identity, looking over his shoulder. Marissa, left with the silence of people who had once cheered her on. It struck me then that sometimes you don't have to lift a finger for justice to take its course. Some people carry the seeds of their own downfall, planting them long before anyone notices, and by the time they start to sprout, there's nothing left to do but watch the growth consume them. Caleb moved quickly, as if he'd been preparing for this moment long before anyone else realized it was coming. Within weeks, the paperwork was signed, stamped, and done. The ironclad prenup left no room for argument. What was his remained his, what was hers remained hers, and there would be no drawn-out negotiations. It was clean, final, and entirely on his terms. I heard about it through Sophie first, then later in a short message from Caleb himself. He didn't go into detail, but his words carried the weight of someone who had closed a chapter without leaving a single page unturned. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a quiet sense of relief, like a man finally stepping out into fresh air after being trapped in a stale room. Not long after, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was Marissa's mother. Her voice was softer than I remembered, hesitant in a way that made me pause. She told me she knew things had gone wrong between her daughter and me, but she hoped I would consider being part of the baby's life. She spoke about how important it was for the child to have good influences, how the past didn't have to shape the future. I let her finish, but my answer didn't waver. I told her I wasn't the person for that role. Whatever bond I'd had with Marissa had been severed, and there was no rebuilding it, especially not when trust had been the first casualty. She didn't argue, just sighed softly before saying she understood. Still, I could hear the disappointment in her voice as she said goodbye. While all of that played out in the background, my own life began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. The hours I'd poured into researching bakery locations and refining recipes started to pay off. A distributor I'd been courting for months agreed to supply my pastries to several high-end cafes in the city. Then another opportunity followed, an events company looking for unique dessert options for weddings and corporate functions. Each new contract brought me closer to the vision I'd been building for years. My small kitchen became a whirlwind of flour, sugar, and late nights, the air always carrying the scent of something baking. It was exhausting, but in a way that felt alive. The work wasn't just keeping me busy. It was shaping me into someone I hadn't realized I could be. There were moments when I'd stop, hands dusted with powdered sugar, and think about how different my life looked now compared to just a few months earlier. The uncertainty that had once left me second-guessing every decision was gone. In its place was a steadiness, a confidence that didn't need anyone else's approval to feel real. I no longer measured my worth by who I was with or what they saw in me. The person who had once built her life around keeping others happy had been replaced by someone who knew how to stand on her own, and liked it. Independence had become more than just a circumstance. It was a choice I made every day. And with each step toward my bakery, I felt that choice solidify, grounding me in a way no relationship ever had. Caleb's decision to leave town didn't surprise me. He'd talked about starting over somewhere quieter, somewhere no one knew the history he'd been dragged through. When he finally packed up and went, there wasn't some tearful goodbye. Just a simple coffee together, a shared smile, and an unspoken understanding that some friendships don't need constant presence to stay strong. We promised to keep in touch, and I knew we would. He was one of the few people left from that tangled mess whose loyalty I'd never had to question. From time to time, news of Ryan filtered in, never from anyone close, always through those strange, roundabout channels gossip tends to travel. The last I heard, he'd resurfaced under another name, charming his way into a new circle and, predictably, finding trouble there too. Apparently, he hadn't abandoned his habits. He'd just taken them on the road. The details didn't shock me. If anything, they only confirmed what I already knew. He'd never been someone capable of real change. As for me, life didn't exactly slow down. The bakery plans were moving forward, and between managing supply orders, designing menus, and making deliveries, I barely had time to think about the past. But I wasn't hiding from it anymore either. It was just there. A piece of my history that no longer dictated my next step. Dating, when it happened, was different now. I wasn't looking for someone to fill a gap or complete a picture. I was fine as I was. I met people for coffee, dinner, or a walk in the park, but I didn't rush. I listened more, watched how they treated others, and paid attention to the small things that used to slip past me. My guard was there, not as a wall, but as a filter. If someone wasn't who they claimed to be, I'd know long before I let them anywhere near my life. There were moments, quiet evenings after closing the kitchen, or early mornings when the streets were still empty, where I'd look back and almost laugh at how much I'd once tolerated. I used to think betrayal was something you could recover from only by confronting the person who hurt you, demanding an apology, or getting some form of closure. But I'd learned that wasn't true. Closure didn't come from Ryan. It didn't come from Marissa. It didn't even come from watching the fallout they faced. It came from building something so solid for myself that their shadows couldn't touch it. The real win wasn't that they'd lost. It was that I'd stopped caring whether they did. That shift was subtle but powerful. Every order I fulfilled, every contract I secured, every happy customer who came back for more, it all became proof that the life I was building was mine alone. No one else got to take credit for it. No one else got to define it. I'd dodged a bullet, yes, but more than that, I'd learned to run my own race without looking over my shoulder. Betrayal had once felt like a wound that would leave me limping for years. Instead, it became the thing that pushed me forward, forcing me to find strength I didn't know I had. By the time my bakery sign finally went up, I realized the past wasn't a weight anymore. It was fuel, and I was done letting anyone else hold the match.